Hi, and welcome to another episode of Piano TV. Today we are going to do something super awesome. We are going to learn music in a different key signature, which is basically like saying we're going to learn songs based on a different scale. So instead of learning songs in C, we are going to learn some songs in G, which means there's some new exercises to learn, there's some new chords to learn, and we're going to talk a little bit of chord theory stuff too, because that's always a good time. Let's get right into it. Okay, so let's talk key signatures and scales for a second here. So as you've already learned, C scale doesn't have any sharps or flats. And C songs based on C scale also don't have any sharps and flats. So the beginning of a song based on the key of C will look something like this. There's nothing going on over here. Any sharps or flats will be directly indicated on the score. We're going to start a new one today. We're going to start G scale, or the key of G. Now, with G scale, what you'll notice is there's this sharp symbol hovering at the beginning. And if you look really carefully, the line that's on is on the F line. So what this is telling us is a couple things. That's an F and that's a sharp. Just work with me, use your imagination. What this is telling us is that in G scale, there's an F sharp, and we'll get to that. But when you play any song that's based on G scale, and you see this little sharp floating at the beginning of the song, it means in that song, every single F you come across, you want to play it as an F sharp instead of just a regular F. It's kind of like they didn't want to go and mark in every single F sharp on like every F that was on the page. So they were like, hey guys, just gonna put this F sharp at the very beginning here. It's up to you to remember whenever you get to an F, make it sharp. So here's today's G pentascale exercise. If you remember from the C pentascale several lessons back that we did, penta is the word that means 5. So this isn't a full scale, this is just a 5-finger scale. So the 5 letters that are in G pentascale, we have G, and then if you know the alphabet, you can figure this out. C, and it goes up to D. So here's our key signature at the beginning of this song, which if you were listening 30 seconds ago, you'll remember that this means that every F in this entire song is going to be an F sharp. Fortunately, the 5-finger version of G scale doesn't have any F, so we don't have to worry about that right now. So if you take a look over here, at the end of each line, you have a chord. And this is a new chord that we haven't really done yet, but I'm sure you can figure it out. So the bottom note's a G, followed by B, followed by D, which it's all separated by a third, so that is going to be a new chord, G major chord, woohoo. So I'm gonna play this exercise for you so you can hear it all through, and then we'll talk more in depth about chords and stuff. So we're going to spend a moment to do just a little bit of theory here. So when we learn music based on C major scale, we learned C chord, and we also learn G7 chord. In music, chords are sometimes represented by Roman numerals. So since C is the first chord and note of C scale, it's represented with the Roman numeral 1. As you could probably imagine. G chord is represented by the Roman numeral for 5 because it's the 5th note of C scale. And we often play G as G7, so I'm going to just go and add a little 7 there. So these chords, the 1st and the 5th chord, no matter which scale your song is based on, whether it's C scale or G scale or D scale or any scale, they are the most important chords, the 1st and the 5th chord. The 1st chord is also called the tonic chord, and it's kind of like your home base. Songs will usually start and end on the tonic note. The 5th chord is also known as the dominant, and the dominant's job is to create this wonderful tension, which is really necessary to music to give it some dimension and flavor. Just so you can hear what I'm talking about, here's our tonic chord, C major, which is our home base, and here's our G7 chord, which is the dominant, which is our tension chord. You can really hear that if I go back and forth. Home, tension, home. So I'm going to play just a little bit of Ode to Joy so you can see how that home tension dynamic is played out in the context of a simple piece. Listen to how this is created creating kind of a pulling sound. It almost makes your ear really want it to go back to home bass. So that's how dominant and tonic chords work. All right, so let's apply that same theory to a G major scale. So when a song's based on a G scale, the most important chord is going to be, you can probably figure this out, G chord, because it is the tonic, it is the first note of the scale. It's very important. This guy's your home bass. The second most important chord, as you also can probably guess, is going to be D. And the reason it's D is because it's the fifth note of the scale. And since D chord is often, or the fifth chord is often played as a 7 to be a dominant 7, I'm just going to label that as 1 and V7 over here in Roman numerals. So now I'll show you what that's going to sound like on the piano. So this time our tonic chord is G major chord, and this is going to sound like our home bass now. And our dominant chord is D7, which is our tension creating chord. So this is what it would sound like with the first little bit of Ode to Joy in G now. Has the exact same dynamic, just because it's played on it's starting on a different key. Now I'm starting on G instead of C. The dynamic, the play between the tonic chord and the dominant chord still comes through. So if you're going to take anything away from this, it's that in any scale, it's going to be the first and the fifth chords that are the most important ones. Here are the notes of G chord right here, G, B, and D. And here are the notes for D7, F sharp, C, and D. The notes of D7 have been simplified and rearranged a little bit so that you can have the easiest movement from this G chord, which is the exact same pattern as C chord that you learned before. And this D7 is the exact same pattern as G7 that you learned before. The only difference is that since you're in the key of G, there's an F sharp, and everything's transposed up to different keys. So let's try these out on the keyboard. Now, just so you can see it again, here's our G chord. And here's our D7 chord. Now that shape and pattern is identical to the C and G7 chord that we learned earlier. Except these chords are now going to be in the key of G, which means they involve that F sharp. So now on to the music. Let's go. Woohoo! Ode to Joy, which is a Beethoven piece that you've almost definitely heard. You'll recognize it, I'm sure, once I start playing it. But let's analyze the music a little bit first. So if you take a look at the very beginning, you see that floating F sharp, which is telling you that this song is going to be based on G scale. And that's further proved by the fact that the first chord is G, which is kind of like our home chord. All right, so here are those two chords that we were just practicing, your G chord and your D7 chord. Now notice the D7, the F sharp isn't marked right where the chord appears because you've got this F sharp situation warning at the very beginning of the song. So remember, this is telling you that in the whole song, it's up to you to remember that every single F is sharp because it is not going to mark it for you. So you've been warned. At the end here, to change up the pattern of G and D7 and G and D7 and so on, you have a C chord, which is happy. He's an old familiar face, and we all know and love C chord. Except this time it's a little bit different. You'll notice that the pattern is a little bit different. So instead of C being the bottom note, this time G is the bottom note. So the notes of C chord here have been rearranged just to make it easier to play in the context of G chord and D7 chord. So watch out for that. Also take notice of the dynamic markings in this piece because that's what's really going to give it like life and character. So a really interesting thing to start looking at and listen to when I play for you is in the third line, you start with a quiet volume piano, and then towards the end, it has this gradually getting louder thing. So each note, note by note, you want to kind of work up a pattern of getting loud so that for the last line, you have like a nice forte volume, and it's just a really cool effect. So listen for that. Thank thank you for watching another video. Have fun with Beethoven and the key of G, and I'm talking like this, talking like a song. I'm making up a song, doing a little dance. And subscribe and comment if you have anything to say, constructively or unconstructively, or anything that you want to say. I'm really trailing off here, so I'm just gonna say bye! I'm kicking the tripod, so if there's like some shakiness, I'm getting really excited, I'm flailing, I'm kicking.